England, 1829. The morning mist rested upon the verdant hills of London like a silken veil, whilst carriages traversed the cobblestone streets bearing their occupants lulled by the rituals of high society. In that rigorous winter, when the cold penetrated even the most heated salons of aristocratic mansions, there lived a man whose presence chilled more severely than any snowstorm. His name was pronounced in respectful whispers, and his reputation preceded him like an imposing shadow through every ballroom in England. Alexander Wrenwood, the Duke of Harrington, possessed a fortune that rivaled that of the Crown itself, lands that extended across entire counties, and a title that traced back 3 centuries of uncontested nobility. Yet it was not his properties that caused gentlemen to avert their gaze when he entered a room, nor was it merely his wealth that made ladies' hearts flutter with nervous anticipation. It was something far more intangible, far more compelling. Alexander possessed an aura of absolute command, a voice that resonated with unwavering authority, and eyes of such penetrating grey that they seemed to pierce through pretense and falsehood with surgical precision. At 32 years of age, the Duke had perfected the art of emotional distance. He moved through society with the calculated grace of a chess master, each gesture measured, each word carefully selected. His countenance remained perpetually composed, whether discussing matters of Parliament or declining yet another matrimonial proposition from ambitious mammas. He had learned, through years of navigating the treacherous waters of aristocratic society, that vulnerability was weakness, and weakness was unacceptable for a man of his station. The creation of this impenetrable fortress had not occurred overnight. Alexander's childhood had been marked by strict discipline and emotional austerity. His father, the previous duke, had been a man who believed that sentiment corrupted judgment and that affection weakened character. Young Alexander had been raised in isolation from warmth, taught that his value lay solely in maintaining the family's prestigious reputation and expanding its already considerable influence. When his mother had died during his 10th year, his father had forbidden him to weep, stating that dukes did not indulge in such vulgar displays of emotion. Alexander had obeyed. He had buried his grief so deeply that eventually he forgot where he had hidden it. He had transformed himself into precisely what his father demanded: a man of iron will and frozen heart, capable of navigating society's complexities without the inconvenient complications of genuine feeling. When his father passed away 8 years ago, Alexander had assumed the title with the same emotional detachment he applied to all aspects of his existence, never questioning whether this life of carefully maintained distance was truly living at all. The ladies of the ton spoke of him in hushed, reverent tones. They adorned themselves in their finest silks and jewels, hoping to capture even a moment of his attention. They practiced their most winning smiles, their most elegant curtsies, their most charming witticisms. Yet the Duke remained unmoved, observing their performances with the detached interest of one watching actors upon a stage. He understood the game perfectly because he had mastered it long ago. A discreet smile here, a calculated compliment there, and they would surrender their hearts willingly, never knowing they had touched nothing of his own. Lady Caroline Ashford had pursued him relentlessly for 2 entire seasons, deploying every stratagem her considerable beauty and cunning could devise. She had positioned herself strategically at every event he attended, had engineered countless accidental encounters, had even staged a compromising situation that might have forced a proposal from a gentleman of lesser resolve. Alexander had simply walked away, unmoved by her tears and threats, his reputation for coldness only enhanced by the incident. Miss Penelope Hartworth, daughter of an earl and renowned for her musical accomplishments, had attempted to touch his heart through art. She had performed exclusively for him at gatherings, had sent him poetry she claimed to have composed in his honor, had even commissioned a portrait of herself, which she had presented as a gift. Alexander had thanked her politely, hung the portrait in a rarely visited corridor, and never thought of either the painting or its subject again. Countless others had tried and failed, each attempt only reinforcing Alexander's conviction that women were uniformly calculating creatures seeking elevation through marriage, that genuine sentiment was merely a performance designed to manipulate, and that his heart was better kept locked away where it could neither be exploited nor wounded. He had convinced himself that this was sufficient, that the ordered predictability of his existence was not merely acceptable, but preferable. Love, he believed, was a foolish sentiment indulged by poets and dreamers, an affliction that clouded judgment and weakened resolve. He required no such complications in his meticulously arranged life. His days followed precise patterns, mornings devoted to estate management, afternoons to parliamentary responsibilities, evenings to obligatory social appearances. He maintained cordial but distant relationships with his peers, employed servants who knew better than to engage him in unnecessary conversation, and structured his life to minimize any possibility of emotional disruption. Until the evening when everything changed. The winter ball at Lady Pemberton's estate was attended by the finest families in England. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows upon silk-gowned ladies and impeccably dressed gentlemen as they waltzed across polished floors. The air hummed with laughter, gossip, and the subtle orchestrations of matrimonial ambitions. Alexander attended out of obligation rather than desire, his presence fulfilling social expectations whilst his mind remained elsewhere, contemplating estate matters and parliamentary business that awaited his attention. He stood near the marble columns at the periphery of the ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand, when his gaze fell upon her quite by accident. At first, she appeared merely as another young lady among many, distinguished only by her position at the very edge of the gathering, standing slightly apart from the glittering crowd. But something about her stillness caught his attention in a way that the animated performances of others could not. Arabella Montgomery was not dancing. She was not laughing gaily with friends, nor casting hopeful glances toward eligible gentlemen. She simply stood there, her hands clasped gently before her, watching her younger sister command the attention of every gentleman within proximity. Her gown, a modest creation in pale blue silk, lacked the elaborate embellishments favored by other ladies, yet its simplicity suited her in a manner that the Duke found unexpectedly arresting. What struck Alexander most profoundly, however, was her expression. There was no bitterness in her countenance as she observed her sister's triumph, no envy darkening her features. Instead, she wore a look of serene acceptance, tinged perhaps with a melancholy so subtle that only the most observant would perceive it. She appeared utterly content to remain unseen, as though she had long ago accepted her role as the forgotten daughter, the overlooked sister, the invisible woman in a room full of those desperate to be noticed. Alexander found himself analyzing this curious phenomenon with the same intense focus he applied to parliamentary debates. How had this young woman achieved such perfect invisibility in a society where everyone constantly performed for attention? What experiences had taught her to fade so completely into the background? And why, when surrounded by ladies who exhausted themselves seeking his notice, did this one woman who appeared entirely indifferent to his existence capture his attention so completely? He watched as an elderly gentleman approached her, clearly mistaking her for a servant, requesting she fetch him refreshment. Arabella had simply smiled gently and redirected him toward the actual staff, her grace in handling the insult remarkable. The gentleman had apologized profusely upon realizing his error, but the damage had been done. She was so thoroughly invisible that even her presence as a guest at the ball could be overlooked. And in that moment of quiet observation, Alexander felt something shift within his chest, something he could not immediately identify. It was as though a carefully constructed wall had developed the smallest of cracks, imperceptible yet present. He felt an unfamiliar tightness in his throat, an unexpected warmth spreading through his ribs, sensations so foreign that he initially mistook them for physical illness. He watched as she turned slightly, her profile illuminated by candlelight, and he observed the gentle curve of her neck, the way her dark hair had been arranged simply at the nape, without the elaborate coiffures others favored. There was an honesty to her appearance, an absence of artifice that seemed revolutionary in a society built upon carefully maintained facades. She wore no excessive jewelry, no dramatic cosmetics, nothing designed to attract or manipulate. She simply existed, apparently content to do so without audience or applause. The Duke found himself taking a step forward before conscious thought could intervene. He who never acted on impulse, who calculated every movement with strategic precision, moved toward this unknown woman as though drawn by forces beyond his understanding. His heart accelerated in a manner that would have concerned his physician. His palms grew uncharacteristically damp within his gloves, and his carefully maintained composure threatened to desert him entirely. Yet before he could reach her, she had slipped away, disappearing into the crowd with the practiced ease of one accustomed to being overlooked. Alexander stood motionless, champagne forgotten in his hand, his grey eyes scanning the ballroom with uncharacteristic urgency. For the first time in memory, he felt unbalanced, as though the ground beneath him had shifted imperceptibly. He, who prided himself on absolute control, could not explain this sudden compulsion, this need to discover the identity of a woman who had done nothing to attract his notice save for existing in perfect, unassuming silence. "Your Grace appears distracted this evening," came the amused voice of Lord Blackwood, one of his few genuine acquaintances. "Surely not by the mediocre entertainment on offer." Alexander turned his penetrating gaze upon his friend, his expression revealing nothing despite the turmoil within. "Who is the young lady in pale blue, the one standing near the terrace doors earlier?" Lord Blackwood's eyebrows rose in surprise, his expression reflecting genuine astonishment. In their 15 years of friendship, he had never witnessed the Duke express interest in any woman. "I confess I did not notice anyone in particular. There are so many young ladies present, all dressed in their pastels and whites. Could you be more specific?" The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a subtle indication of frustration visible only to those who knew him well. That she could be so thoroughly invisible to others confirmed what he had already perceived. She had perfected the art of being unseen, and he found himself disturbed by how successfully she had accomplished this feat. More disturbing still was his own reaction to her absence, this inexplicable sense of loss for something he had never possessed. "Never mind," Alexander murmured, his voice carrying that edge of authority that discouraged further inquiry. But he could not dismiss her so easily. Throughout the remainder of the evening, his attention wandered repeatedly to the periphery of the ballroom, searching for that pale blue gown, that serene countenance. He caught glimpses of her occasionally, always at the edges, always alone or in the shadow of her vivacious sister. Each time she seemed utterly unaware of his observation, which only intensified his fascination. She did not seek his gaze, did not position herself strategically within his line of sight, did not employ any of the countless tactics he had learned to recognize and dismiss. He observed her refuse an invitation to dance from a young gentleman who clearly regarded the request as charitable obligation rather than genuine interest. She had declined with such grace that the rejection appeared a favor rather than an insult. He watched her fetch refreshment for her sister without being asked, anticipating needs before they were expressed. He noted the way she listened with genuine attention when others spoke, offering no interruptions or attempts to redirect conversation toward herself. What manner of woman could remain so completely indifferent to the presence of the most sought-after gentleman in England? What thoughts occupied her mind as she stood there, seemingly content in her solitude? These questions plagued him with an insistence he found both irritating and compelling. He tried to redirect his thoughts toward matters of consequence, toward the parliamentary votes scheduled for the following week, or the estate accounts requiring his review, but his mind refused to cooperate, returning obsessively to the mystery of the invisible lady. When he finally learned her identity through discreet inquiry with Lady Pemberton's steward, the information only deepened the mystery. Miss Arabella Montgomery, aged 26, eldest daughter of Sir Harold Montgomery, a gentleman of respectable but unremarkable fortune. Never courted, never the subject of romantic speculation, perpetually overshadowed by her younger sister, Miss Emily Elizabeth Montgomery, who was considered the beauty of the family and had received 3 proposals in her first season alone. 26. By society's cruel standards, she was nearly beyond marriageable age, relegated to the category of those unfortunate women destined for spinsterhood. Most women in her position exhibited desperation, their eyes following eligible gentlemen with barely concealed anxiety, their conversation peppered with increasingly obvious hints about their domestic capabilities. Yet Alexander detected none of this desperate anxiety in Arabella. She carried herself with quiet dignity, as though she had made peace with her fate, and found contentment in places others did not think to seek. The steward, encouraged by a generous monetary incentive, provided additional details. Miss Arabella was known to be extraordinarily well-read, often found in the lending library when other young ladies were shopping for ribbons and bonnets. She volunteered at a local charity that provided education for impoverished children, teaching them to read, despite society's general disapproval of such activities. She was reported to possess a gentle temperament, never speaking ill of anyone despite ample provocation, and was beloved by the Montgomery servants for her kindness and consideration. These details should have satisfied Alexander's curiosity, yet they only intensified it. Here was a woman of substance, of genuine character and accomplishment, hidden in plain sight while society celebrated superficiality and performance. The injustice of it disturbed him in ways he could not fully articulate, awakening something that might have been righteous anger on her behalf, or perhaps recognition of his own complicity in a system that valued appearance over authenticity. In the days that followed, the Duke found his thoughts returning to her with troubling frequency. He, who had never permitted any woman to disturb his mental equilibrium, discovered himself wondering about her daily routines, her thoughts, her dreams. He imagined her in that lending library, selecting volumes with careful consideration, her face illuminated with intellectual pleasure as she discovered some new philosophical argument or poetic expression. He pictured her with those impoverished children, patient and encouraging, as she guided their hands across slate tablets, celebrating their progress with genuine joy. These imaginings embarrassed him. Alexander Wrenwood, Duke of Harrington, had never indulged in romantic fantasy. He had always regarded such mental wanderings as wasteful and undignified, yet he found himself unable to prevent them. During parliamentary sessions, his mind would drift to wonder what she might think of the legislation under discussion. While reviewing estate accounts, he would imagine her response to various philanthropic opportunities. Even during his morning routine, he caught himself selecting waistcoats based on which color she might find pleasing. A consideration so absurd that he actually laughed at himself, a sound so unusual that his valet had inquired whether His Grace was feeling quite well. It was ridiculous, he told himself repeatedly. Absurd that a man of his position should become preoccupied with a woman who had not even acknowledged his existence. He had important responsibilities, significant matters demanding his attention. He could not afford to waste mental energy on foolish infatuation, particularly for someone so utterly unsuitable for a duchess. She possessed no significant fortune, no impressive family connections, no social prominence that would benefit the Harrington legacy. A prudent man would dismiss these thoughts immediately and redirect his matrimonial considerations toward someone appropriate. Yet Alexander discovered that prudence and his heart were no longer in agreement. Pride demanded that he dismiss these peculiar ruminations and return his attention to matters of consequence. Yet pride, that reliable companion that had governed his actions for so many years, found itself challenged by something more potent. For the first time since childhood, Alexander found himself wanting something beyond duty and reputation. He wanted to know this woman, to understand her, to discover whether the connection he felt was genuine or merely the product of novelty and curiosity. 3 weeks passed before Alexander encountered her again, 3 weeks during which he exercised uncharacteristic patience, despite an urgency that surprised him. He had taken to riding through Hyde Park during the unfashionable morning hours, ostensibly for exercise but secretly hoping to glimpse her. His servants had noted the Duke's unusual behavior with carefully concealed astonishment, for their master had never before deviated from his rigidly maintained schedule for any reason, much less for one as frivolous as a morning ride. His head groom had initially questioned whether His Grace truly wished to ride at such an hour, when the park would be nearly deserted, and there would be no one of consequence to observe his excellent horsemanship. Alexander had silenced the inquiry with a look, then felt immediate remorse for his harsh response. The groom had only spoken from long experience of the Duke's preferences, unaware that those preferences had undergone recent, inexplicable revision. On a frost-touched morning, when his breath formed clouds in the cold air and the park lay nearly deserted, save for a few determined riders and early servants conducting errands, he discovered her seated upon a weathered bench beneath a bare oak tree. She held a small volume in her gloved hands, completely absorbed in its pages, apparently oblivious to the cold that made others seek the warmth of their homes. Her cheeks bore the rosy flush of chill air, her breath visible in small puffs as she read, utterly content in her solitary communion with literature. Alexander reined in his horse with more force than necessary, causing the animal to toss its head in protest. He steadied the gelding with practiced ease, while his heart performed acrobatics that would have alarmed him had he paused to consider them. From his elevated position, he studied her for a long moment, observing the way morning light touched her features with unexpected tenderness, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows as she read, the gentle rise and fall of her breath in the frigid air, the unconscious way she occasionally smiled at whatever passage held her attention. She appeared utterly at peace, completely content in her solitary communion with literature. There was something sacred about the moment, something that made him hesitant to intrude upon this private joy. She had found happiness in simplicity, in the pleasure of words and ideas, requiring neither audience nor validation. He envied that contentment, even as he longed to be part of it, to understand what brought that gentle smile to her lips, to share in whatever wisdom or beauty she had discovered within those pages. Yet the desire to speak with her, to finally hear her voice directed toward him, rather than merely overheard in passing, overcame his customary restraint and his reluctance to disturb her peace. Dismounting with practiced ease, Alexander approached her with measured steps, suddenly uncertain of himself in a way he had not experienced since adolescence. What would he say? How would he justify this intrusion? She had given him no invitation, no encouragement, no indication that his attention would be welcome. For a man accustomed to women actively seeking his notice, this reversal left him feeling vulnerable and exposed. He stopped at a respectful distance, clearing his throat gently to announce his presence, aware that she had not yet perceived his approach, so absorbed was she in her reading. Arabella looked up with a start, her eyes widening slightly as recognition dawned. The book nearly slipped from her gloved fingers, and he observed a rapid succession of emotions cross her features: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been apprehension. She rose immediately, executing a graceful curtsy appropriate to his rank, despite her obvious discomposure. "Your Grace," she murmured, her voice soft yet clear, like the notes of a carefully played pianoforte. The sound of her voice affected Alexander in ways he had not anticipated. It carried a gentle warmth that seemed to resonate within his chest, creating sensations he could not name but found immediately addictive. He wanted to hear her speak again, wanted to discover whether every word would produce this curious alchemy of comfort and excitement. "Miss Montgomery," he acknowledged, struck by the curious sensation that accompanied hearing her speak his title. There was no calculation in her tone, no flirtation or manipulation, simply the respectful acknowledgement one might offer any person of rank. "Forgive my intrusion upon your solitude. I observed you seemed quite engrossed in your reading, and wondered what could possibly prove so compelling on such an inhospitable morning." She glanced down at the volume in her hands, a faint color rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. The blush fascinated him, this visible evidence of internal feeling, so different from the carefully controlled expressions he typically encountered. "Milton, Your Grace. I find his verses provide excellent companionship, particularly on mornings such as these when the world seems quiet enough to truly hear them." "Paradise Lost?" Alexander inquired, genuinely surprised. Most young ladies of his acquaintance confined their reading to romantic novels of questionable literary merit, vapid poetry celebrating feminine beauty, or conduct books reinforcing society's restrictive expectations. The few who ventured into more serious literature typically did so as performance, selecting titles designed to impress rather than genuinely engage. "Paradise Regained, actually," she corrected gently, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. Her eyes, he discovered with a sensation akin to physical impact, were a remarkable shade of hazel, containing flecks of gold and green that caught the morning light. They held depths he had not expected, intelligence and feeling existing in harmonious balance. I confess I find the themes of redemption and restoration more hopeful than those of fall and loss. We have quite enough of tragedy in our daily lives without seeking additional sorrow in our literature. The Duke felt something shift within him again, that same inexplicable sensation he had experienced in the ballroom, only stronger now, more insistent. Here was a woman of substance, of genuine thought and feeling, hidden beneath the invisible exterior society had assigned her. She had not selected Milton's work to impress anyone, for she had clearly expected to read in perfect solitude. This was her authentic preference, her genuine intellectual engagement. An interesting perspective, he replied, aware that his usual eloquence had momentarily deserted him, leaving him feeling oddly adolescent and uncertain. Most prefer the dramatic tragedy of the first work, finding in Satan's rebellion and mankind's fall a sort of terrible grandeur. Perhaps, Arabella said softly, her gaze returning to the book in her hands as though seeking refuge there. But I believe we need stories that remind us redemption is possible, that our failures need not define us permanently, that even after great loss we might find restoration. Milton understood that the greater courage lies not in falling grandly, but in rising humbly. There was no self-pity in her words, only a gentle wisdom that spoke of personal struggles overcome through quiet strength. Alexander found himself wanting to know everything about her, to understand what had shaped this remarkable woman who stood before him with such unpretentious grace. What failures had she overcome? What losses had she endured? What had taught her to seek redemption narratives over tragedy? "Might I join you?" he asked, gesturing toward the bench. The request was unprecedented for him. This duke who maintained careful distance from all but his closest associates, who never placed himself in situations that might suggest intimacy or particular interest. Arabella hesitated, clearly surprised by the request, genuine confusion evident in her expression. She glanced around the deserted park, as though seeking explanation for this bizarre situation, perhaps wondering if she had somehow misunderstood his intentions or if this was some elaborate jest at her expense. But good manners prevailed over confusion. "Of course, Your Grace, though I fear I am poor company for one accustomed to more refined society. I have little talent for witty conversation or clever repartee." "On the contrary," Alexander said, settling beside her with a care to maintain proper distance despite an inexplicable desire to move closer, to eliminate the space between them. "I suspect you may prove the most genuine company I have encountered in quite some time. I find myself weary of wit that serves only to display cleverness rather than communicate meaning, of conversation that sparkles on the surface whilst offering nothing of substance beneath." They sat in companionable silence for several moments, an unusual circumstance for the Duke, who typically filled conversational pauses with practiced pleasantries designed to maintain control of social interactions. Yet with her, silence felt not awkward but natural, as though words were unnecessary to establish understanding. He found himself acutely aware of her proximity, of the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her garments, of the gentle sound of her breathing in the quiet morning air. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. Alexander, who had spent his life filling space with carefully chosen words designed to maintain distance and control, discovered an unexpected peace in simply existing beside her without performance or pretense. He watched a small bird land on a nearby branch, observed the way frost glittered on brown grass, noticed details of the world he typically overlooked in his constant rush toward the next obligation. "Do you often read in the park?" he inquired eventually, reluctant to break the silence but wanting to hear her voice again, to continue this connection that felt simultaneously fragile and essential. "When weather permits," Arabella replied, her gaze fixed upon the bare branches above them, their skeletal beauty stark against the pale winter sky. "I find the solitude here conducive to reflection. At home, there is always commotion, always demands upon one's attention. Mama is forever planning social engagements for Emily, Papa concerns himself with matters of finance and property, and the servants bustle about their duties. Here I can simply be myself without expectation or judgment, without needing to be anyone other than who I truly am. And who is that self?" The question emerged before Alexander could consider its boldness, before he could apply his usual filter of careful consideration to his words. Arabella turned to regard him with those luminous eyes, and he saw surprise mingled with something else, something that might have been cautious hope or perhaps fear that hope itself was dangerous. "I scarcely know any more, Your Grace. I have spent so long being invisible, so long being defined by what I am not rather than what I am, that I sometimes wonder if there is anything substantial beneath the surface others refuse to see. Am I truly a person, or merely an absence where a person ought to be?" The admission pierced something deep within Alexander's carefully defended heart. He recognized in her words an echo of his own isolation, though manifested differently. While he had built walls of ice and authority to keep others at distance, she had been forced into invisibility by the cruelty of societal indifference. Both had learned to protect themselves through emotional withdrawal, yet hers had been imposed rather than chosen. "I see you," he said quietly, the words carrying more weight than he intended, more truth than he typically permitted himself to speak. The moment he uttered them, he felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he had not experienced since childhood, as though he had revealed something fundamental about himself that could be used against him. Arabella's breath caught audibly, a sharp intake of surprise that seemed to encompass more than mere shock at his words. For a moment, she appeared vulnerable in a way that made Alexander want to shield her from every hurt the world had inflicted upon her invisible presence, to stand between her and every person who had failed to see her value. Then, as though remembering herself and her place in the established social order, she offered a small, sad smile that broke something within him. "So you are very kind, Your Grace, but we both know that gentlemen of your station notice ladies like my sister, not women like myself. I am perfectly at peace with my circumstances, truly I am." "Then perhaps I am not like other gentlemen," Alexander replied with unusual intensity, leaning slightly toward her despite his ingrained habits of proper distance. "No," Arabella agreed softly, studying him with newfound interest, her hazel eyes searching his face as though seeking to read truth written there. "I suspect you are not. The Duke of Harrington is reputed to be cold and distant, yet you sit here on a frozen bench discussing Milton with a woman no one else bothers to notice. That suggests either madness or a complexity your reputation does not encompass." Alexander found himself smiling, a genuine expression that felt strange on features more accustomed to calculated displays or severe neutrality. "Perhaps both. I confess I cannot entirely explain my presence here, only that I find your company remarkably restful. You make no demands, offer no performances, seem entirely content to simply be. That is an extraordinary rarity in my experience." "Because I have nothing to gain," Arabella replied with unexpected frankness. "Women pursue you because you are a duke, because you represent security and status and social elevation. I have long since accepted that such prizes are not meant for women like me, so I need not exhaust myself in futile pursuit. This allows me a certain freedom to simply be myself, inadequate though that self may be." "You are not inadequate," Alexander said firmly, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. "You are remarkably well read, clearly intelligent, possess genuine kindness and demonstrate admirable strength in maintaining grace despite circumstances that would embitter most. These qualities far exceed the superficial accomplishments society celebrates." Arabella looked at him with wonder, as though he had spoken in a foreign tongue or performed some inexplicable magic. "Your Grace, you hardly know me. How can you possibly make such assessments?" "I am an excellent judge of character," he replied. "It is a skill necessity taught me, and I recognize authenticity when I encounter it, rare though such encounters may be." They spoke for nearly 2 hours, their conversation ranging from literature to philosophy, from observations about society's absurdities to quieter reflections on the nature of happiness and fulfillment. Alexander discovered in Arabella a mind of remarkable depth and sensitivity, combined with a gentle wit that emerged unexpectedly, making him laugh in a way he had not done in years. She challenged his assumptions without confrontation, offered perspectives he had not considered, and listened to his ideas with genuine interest, rather than the calculated attention he typically received. She did not flatter him, did not simper or employ the calculated charm he had come to expect from women seeking his favor. Instead, she spoke to him as an equal, offering opinions that occasionally contradicted his own, yet doing so with such gracious respect that disagreement became dialogue rather than confrontation. When she argued that Milton's Eve deserved more credit for her intellectual curiosity than condemnation for her disobedience, he found himself reconsidering interpretations he had held for years. When she gently questioned whether parliamentary reform should not extend beyond property holders to include all citizens, he discovered perspectives that challenged his comfortable assumptions. More significantly, she asked him questions no one else thought to pose. Not questions about his properties or political influence, but genuine inquiries about his thoughts and feelings. What had inspired his interest in parliamentary service? Did he find fulfillment in his responsibilities? What did he read for pleasure rather than duty? Had he always been so serious, or had circumstances shaped him thus? Her questions unnerved him precisely because they sought to know him as a person rather than a duke, to understand Alexander rather than merely interact with Harrington. He found himself answering with unusual honesty, sharing thoughts and feelings he typically kept carefully guarded, surprising himself with his own candor. When finally they parted, Alexander found himself reluctant to leave, a sensation entirely foreign to his experience. He who typically fled social obligations at the earliest opportunity wished to prolong this encounter indefinitely. The prospect of returning to his empty estate, to his carefully ordered but emotionally barren existence, held no appeal whatsoever. "Might I call upon you, Miss Montgomery?" he asked as he prepared to depart, his heart accelerating with nervousness he had not felt since his first speech in Parliament. Arabella's expression revealed her astonishment, her eyes widening with shock that appeared entirely genuine. "Your Grace, surely you cannot mean to—" "That is, I am hardly the sort of lady that dukes pay calls upon. My family is respectable but unremarkable. I possess no significant accomplishments, and I am well past the age when gentlemen find ladies interesting. Nevertheless, I should like to call upon you if you would permit it," Alexander persisted, recognizing his own determination with some surprise. He, who typically approached all matters with calculated caution, found himself pursuing this connection with uncharacteristic urgency. She searched his face, perhaps seeking signs of jest or cruel mockery, but finding only sincerity in his steady grey gaze. "Then yes, Your Grace. Though I warn you, my parents will likely assume you have come to see Emily. She is everything I am not. Young, beautiful, accomplished, and very much the sort of lady that dukes pursue. Then I shall endeavor to make my intentions perfectly clear from the outset," Alexander replied, surprising himself with his determination to ensure no confusion existed regarding whom he sought. As he rode away, he glanced back once to see her still standing there, the forgotten book in her hands, watching him with an expression of wonder that made his heart perform peculiar acrobatics within his chest. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, Alexander felt something beyond duty or obligation. He felt hope, anticipation, and the terrifying vulnerability of genuine emotion. True to his word, the Duke presented himself at the Montgomery residence the following afternoon. The modest townhouse in Bloomsbury could not compare to his own palatial estate in Mayfair, yet he noted its comfortable gentility with approval. The brick exterior was well maintained if somewhat aged. The small front garden showed evidence of careful tending, despite winter's barrenness, and the brass knocker gleamed from recent polishing. This was a home of people who took pride in what they had, even if what they had was modest by aristocratic standards. A startled butler admitted him, clearly unaccustomed to receiving such distinguished visitors. The elderly man actually stammered while taking Alexander's card, his hands trembling slightly as he beheld the Harrington crest. Your Grace! What an unexpected honor! Please, do come in. I shall inform Sir Harold immediately." The entrance hall, though small, was decorated with tasteful simplicity. Watercolor landscapes hung on walls papered in a modest stripe. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in one corner, and the scent of beeswax polish suggested diligent housekeeping despite limited staff. It was clean, comfortable, and wholly unpretentious, a space that valued substance over show. Sir Harold and Lady Montgomery appeared within moments, clearly having dropped whatever activities had occupied them to rush to the drawing-room. Their expressions revealed transparent calculation mixed with barely concealed shock. They had obviously assumed, as Arabella predicted, that the Duke had come to court their younger daughter. Lady Montgomery immediately summoned Emily, sending a maid scurrying upstairs with breathless urgency. Emily entered the drawing room with practiced grace and a smile designed to enchant, every movement carefully choreographed to display her considerable charms to maximum advantage. She had clearly been schooled extensively in the art of attracting gentlemen, and she deployed her considerable arsenal with confidence. Her gown of pale pink muslin was cut to flatter her youthful figure. Her golden curls were arranged in an elaborate style that had likely required her maid's attention for an hour, and her blue eyes sparkled with calculated warmth. "Your Grace," Sir Harold said obsequiously, his tone carrying the mixture of respect and opportunistic hope that Alexander found tedious. "What an honor to receive you in our humble home. I trust you have come to—" "I have come to call upon Miss Arabella Montgomery," Alexander interrupted with quiet authority, his voice carrying that unmistakable tone of command that brooked no argument. He noted the shock that registered on every face save Arabella's, who had just entered the room behind her sister, her expression suggesting she had expected precisely this confusion. "Arabella," Lady Montgomery repeated, as though the name were foreign to her, as though she could not quite comprehend why anyone would seek her elder daughter's company. "Surely your Grace means Emily. Perhaps you misspoke." "I mean precisely whom I stated," the Duke replied coolly, his grey eyes hardening slightly at the woman's obtuseness and the implicit insult to Arabella. "If Miss Arabella is available to receive me, I should be most grateful for the opportunity to speak with her." Arabella stepped forward, her composure admirable despite the unprecedented circumstances and her family's barely concealed shock. "I am available, Your Grace." The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to slice with a knife. Emily's practiced smile had frozen into something rather less attractive, transforming into a rictus of confusion and wounded pride. Sir Harold appeared utterly bewildered by this unexpected turn, clearly struggling to comprehend why the most eligible bachelor in England would seek his elder daughter, when the younger, prettier one stood readily available. Lady Montgomery looked as though she might faint from sheer confusion, her hand fluttering to her throat as she attempted to process this incomprehensible development. Alexander, however, paid them no attention. His focus remained entirely upon Arabella, as he requested permission to walk with her in their modest garden, properly chaperoned, of course. Lady Montgomery, recovering from her shock with visible effort, quickly agreed, assigning a maid to accompany them at a discreet distance. The garden, though small, had been arranged with thoughtful care. Winter had stripped the roses of their blooms, but the structure of the garden revealed aesthetic sensibility. A small fountain stood at the center, currently still in deference to freezing temperatures, and gravel paths wound between dormant flower beds that would likely prove charming in spring. "I must apologize for my family's reaction," Arabella said softly once they were outside, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "They meant no disrespect to your Grace. They are simply unaccustomed to gentlemen calling upon me specifically." "Then they have been remarkably foolish," Alexander replied frankly, "though I confess their blindness has worked to my advantage. Had others recognized your exceptional qualities, you might already be married, and I would have lost my opportunity to know you." Arabella stopped walking, turning to face him directly, her hazel eyes searching his face with intensity. "Your Grace, I must speak plainly, for I find myself utterly confused by your attentions. Why are you here? What purpose does this serve? I am not beautiful like Emily, not accomplished in the ways society values, not young enough to be considered a good match, and not possessed of fortune or connections that would benefit your position. So I ask again, why?" Alexander appreciated her directness, this refreshing honesty that cut through social pretense to address the heart of the matter. "Because in a world full of performance and artifice, you are genuine. Because when I speak with you, I feel understood rather than merely admired. Because your company brings me a peace I did not know I was missing. Because you see me as a man rather than merely a title and fortune. Are those reasons insufficient?" "They are extraordinary reasons," Arabella whispered, tears gathering in her eyes that she blinked back rapidly. "But, Your Grace, you must understand that I have no experience with courtship, no understanding of these games that others play so skillfully. I do not know how to be coy or mysterious, or any of the things gentlemen supposedly find attractive. I can only be myself, and I fear that self will prove disappointing once the novelty wears away. I am not seeking novelty, Alexander said firmly, taking a step closer to her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes, close enough to catch that subtle scent of lavender that clung to her. I am seeking authenticity, which you possess in abundance. I am seeking genuine conversation rather than calculated flirtation, which you provide without effort. I am seeking a woman of substance rather than superficial charm, and I have found her in you. But what of love? Arabella asked softly, vulnerability evident in every word. Do you speak of love, Your Grace, or merely of compatibility and respect? Because I must confess that I could not bear to be married without love, to spend my life as a convenient companion rather than a cherished wife. I have been overlooked for too long to accept being merely tolerated, however graciously. The question struck Alexander with unexpected force, exposing the very uncertainty he had been avoiding examining too closely. Did he love her? He hardly knew what love meant, having spent his entire adult life denying its existence or relevance. What he felt was unlike anything in his previous experience, a constant awareness of her, a desire for her company that superseded all other considerations, a sense that his life had been somehow incomplete until she entered it, a fierce protectiveness that made him want to shield her from every pain, a vulnerability that both terrified and exhilarated him. I do not know if what I feel is love, he admitted with the same honesty she had shown him, for I have no experience with such sentiment. I only know that thoughts of you occupy my mind constantly, that I find myself arranging my schedule in hopes of encountering you, that your happiness has become more important to me than my own comfort, that the prospect of a future without you in it seems suddenly unbearable. If that is not love, then I do not know what name to give these feelings that have utterly disrupted my carefully ordered existence. Arabella's tears spilled over now, tracking slowly down her cheeks, and Alexander found himself reaching out instinctively to brush them away with gentle fingers, propriety forgotten in the moment's emotion. No one has ever spoken such words to me, she said brokenly. No one has ever wanted me, specifically me, for myself alone. Then everyone else has been blind, Alexander replied, his voice roughening with emotion he no longer tried to suppress. But their blindness is my gain, for it means you are still free to choose. So I ask you, Arabella, will you allow me to court you properly? Will you give me the opportunity to prove that what I feel is genuine and lasting? Will you risk trusting that someone finally sees you for who you truly are? Yes, she whispered. Yes, though I am terrified of the disappointment that may follow. There will be no disappointment, Alexander promised, hoping desperately that he could fulfill that vow, that these unprecedented feelings would prove as enduring as they felt powerful. The courtship that followed was unlike anything London society had ever witnessed. The Duke of Harrington, known for his coldness and emotional distance, pursued Miss Arabella Montgomery with single-minded determination that shocked the ton. He called upon her daily, sometimes twice daily if obligations permitted. He took her driving in Hyde Park during fashionable hours, deliberately ensuring that society witnessed his attentions. He escorted her to the theatre, to concerts, to art exhibitions, always attentive, always focused entirely upon her, rather than acknowledging the stares and whispers that followed them everywhere. The gossip was relentless and often cruel. How could the Duke choose such an unremarkable woman when beauties like Lady Caroline still pined for him? What spell had this aging spinster cast to capture England's most eligible bachelor? Surely this infatuation would pass once he came to his senses and recognized his mistake. But the gossip only strengthened Alexander's resolve. Each unkind word spoken about Arabella only made him more determined to prove society wrong, to demonstrate through his actions that he valued substance over superficiality. He began declining invitations to events where he knew Arabella would not be welcomed or would be treated dismissively. He withdrew his support from certain social figures who spoke disparagingly about her. He made it clear through both word and deed that insulting Miss Montgomery was equivalent to insulting the Duke himself. For Arabella, this period was simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. She blossomed under Alexander's devoted attention, gaining confidence she had never possessed. Her smiles came more easily, her observations grew bolder, and slowly she began to believe that perhaps she was worthy of love after all. Yet fear lingered beneath her happiness, fear that this dream would shatter, that she would wake to find herself once again invisible and alone. Alexander sensed her lingering doubt and worked patiently to dispel it. He shared aspects of himself he had never revealed to anyone: his complicated relationship with his late father, his struggles with loneliness despite being constantly surrounded by people, his growing realization that the life he had built was emotionally barren despite its material comforts. He wanted her to understand that she was not the only one transformed by their connection, that he too was learning and growing and becoming someone new. They spent hours in conversation, discovering shared interests and complementary differences. She introduced him to poets he had never read, philosophers he had dismissed, perspectives he had never considered. He exposed her to political debates, economic theories, and the complex realities of managing vast estates and responsibilities. They challenged each other intellectually while supporting each other emotionally, creating a partnership that transcended typical courtship conventions. Alexander also made efforts to understand Arabella's world beyond their private conversations. He accompanied her to the charity school where she taught, watching with growing admiration as she patiently guided small hands across slate tablets, celebrating each child's progress with genuine joy. The children adored her, crowding around her with excited chatter, and Alexander saw in their unself-conscious affection a reflection of the love she deserved but had been denied by society's arbitrary standards. "You are remarkable with them," he observed after one such visit, as they walked back to her home. "They are easy to love," Arabella replied simply. "They have no pretense, no judgment, no concern for status or appearance. They simply want to learn, to grow, to become more than circumstance might otherwise allow them. How can one not adore such pure ambition?" "You see yourself in them," Alexander realized suddenly. "You understand what it means to be overlooked based on circumstances beyond one's control." "Perhaps," Arabella admitted, "but more importantly, I believe everyone deserves the opportunity to be seen, to be valued, to reach their potential regardless of birth or fortune. These children have as much right to education and opportunity as any aristocrat's offspring." Her passion on this subject stirred something within Alexander, a desire to use his considerable influence toward more meaningful purposes than merely maintaining tradition and accumulating wealth. What if we could expand the school? What if we could create more such opportunities? Arabella's eyes widened with hope and excitement. "Do you truly mean that, or are you simply being kind?" "I mean it absolutely," Alexander assured her. "I have resources and influence that I have used primarily for my own benefit, or to maintain systems that advantage people like myself. What if I could deploy those resources towards something genuinely meaningful? Would you help me understand how to do so effectively?" And thus began a partnership that extended beyond romance into shared purpose. They began planning together, envisioning ways to create educational opportunities for children who would otherwise be denied them, discussing how to challenge societal structures that arbitrarily limited human potential based on birth rather than ability. These conversations deepened their connection, moving beyond personal attraction into genuine partnership. Alexander discovered that love was not merely feeling but action, not simply emotion, but shared commitment to purposes larger than oneself. Arabella discovered that being valued meant being consulted, being trusted with important decisions, being treated as an equal partner rather than a decorative possession. Yet amid this deepening connection, Alexander still hesitated to speak of marriage. Some part of him, that deeply ingrained caution learned through years of emotional self-protection, resisted taking the final step toward complete vulnerability. What if he proposed and she rejected him? What if marriage changed what they had, introducing obligations and expectations that destroyed the easy intimacy they had developed? What if society's relentless criticism eventually convinced her she had made a mistake in accepting him? These fears were irrational. He recognized that intellectually. Yet knowing fears are irrational does not eliminate them, and Alexander found himself paralyzed between desire and apprehension. The turning point came on an evening in early spring, When the garden at Harrington Manor had begun to wake from winter's sleep, Alexander had invited Arabella to view his extensive rose gardens, which were legendary throughout England. She had accepted with quiet pleasure, accompanied by her maid as propriety demanded, though by this point society had largely accepted that the Duke's courtship was serious and enduring. As they walked among the budding plants, Alexander found himself studying her profile in the fading light. Spring had dressed her in soft green muslin that complemented her coloring beautifully, and the gentle evening air had brought color to her cheeks and a glow to her eyes. She paused occasionally to examine a particularly beautiful specimen, her expression reflecting pure appreciation, untainted by any desire to possess or display. She loved beauty for its own sake, not for what it might reflect upon her, and that genuine appreciation moved him deeply. "You are very quiet this evening, Your Grace," Arabella observed, turning those remarkable eyes upon him. "Have I said something to displease you?" "On the contrary," Alexander replied, "I am contemplating a matter of some significance and trying to summon courage I apparently do not possess." "You? Lacking courage?" Arabella smiled gently. "The Duke who faces down hostile parliamentary opposition without flinching, who defied all society's expectations in pursuing me, who stands unmoved before criticism that would devastate lesser men. What could possibly require courage beyond what you already demonstrate daily?" "This," Alexander said simply, and withdrew from his pocket a small velvet box. Arabella's breath caught audibly as understanding dawned. "Your Grace, please allow me to speak before my courage deserts me entirely," Alexander requested, his voice unsteady in a way it never was in Parliament or business negotiations. "These past months with you have been the most meaningful of my existence. You have shown me that there is more to life than duty and reputation, that vulnerability need not be weakness, and that the heart I believed frozen was merely waiting for the right person to thaw it." He opened the box to reveal a ring of extraordinary beauty, a large emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in platinum. "This stone's color reminded me of your eyes," he explained, "of the way they reflect both wisdom and warmth, depth and gentleness." "Miss Montgomery—" "Arabella," he continued, using her given name with tender emphasis. "These weeks in your company have taught me what love means. It means wanting another's happiness more than your own convenience. It means trusting someone with parts of yourself you have always kept hidden. It means building a life together based on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than mere obligation or social advantage. I have spent my life maintaining absolute control, building walls to protect myself from any sentiment that might compromise my position. Yet you have breached those defenses without even trying, simply by being authentically yourself. You have no artifice, no calculated charm. You are genuine in a world of pretense, and I find I can no longer imagine my life without you in it." Tears gathered in Arabella's eyes as she listened, her hands trembling slightly. The maid, maintaining proper distance, tactfully turned away to examine a particularly fascinating rosebush. "I am asking you to consider something that I never imagined I would ask any woman," Alexander continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you consent to be my wife? Will you stand beside me not as an ornament or a convenience, but as a true partner? Will you help me become the man you have already glimpsed beneath the Duke's exterior? Will you allow me the extraordinary privilege of loving you for the rest of our days?" The question hung in the air between them as Arabella stared at him in complete astonishment, tears now flowing freely. "You cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious in my life," Alexander assured her with absolute conviction. "But you are the Duke of Harrington. You could marry anyone, any titled lady, any great beauty, anyone who would bring you advantage and enhance your position." "I do not want anyone else," Alexander said with quiet intensity, taking both her hands in his. "I want you, only you. You have shown me what my life was missing, what I did not even know I needed. You have given me peace, joy, purpose, and love. Please, Arabella, say yes." She stood trembling before him, tears streaming down her face as emotions she had suppressed for years broke free. "I never dared to dream. I thought I would spend my life invisible, forgotten. existing on the margins of everyone else's happiness, and now you offer me everything I never believed I could have. You offer not just marriage, but partnership, not just security, but love, not just visibility, but genuine value. Is that a yes? He asked, hope and vulnerability evident in his voice, in his eyes, in every line of his body as he waited for her response. Yes, she breathed, the word emerging as both whisper and declaration. 1,000 times yes, though I still cannot quite believe this is real, that you truly choose me, that I am not dreaming. Alexander pulled her gently into his arms, propriety forgotten in the overwhelming emotion of the moment, the maid now studying the roses with exaggerated intensity. Arabella fit perfectly against him, as though they had been designed for precisely this embrace. He felt her tears dampening his coat and did not care, felt his own eyes growing suspiciously damp and did not fight it. You have given me back my heart, he murmured against her hair, breathing in that subtle lavender scent that had become synonymous with home and safety and love. A heart I did not know was missing until you showed me what it could feel. And you have given me visibility, she replied softly, her voice muffled against his chest. You see me, truly see me in all my imperfection and ordinariness, and somehow you find me worthy of love. In doing so, you have made me real, made me believe that I have value beyond what society assigns. They stood thus for several minutes, two souls who had found in each other the completion they had not known they sought. The Duke, who had been the coldest man in England, held in his arms the woman whose quiet warmth had melted his frozen heart, and in that garden, surrounded by awakening roses and the promise of spring, they began their new life together. When they finally separated, Alexander slipped the ring onto Arabella's finger, noting with satisfaction how perfectly it fit, how the emerald caught the fading light and seemed to glow with its own internal fire. It suits you, he said softly. Beautiful, but not ostentatious, valuable but not vain. Arabella gazed at the ring through her tears, then looked up at him with such love and wonder that he felt his heart might burst from the fullness of it. I shall treasure it always, not for its material value, but for what it represents, the end of invisibility and the beginning of being truly known. The announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves through society that made the initial gossip about their courtship seem mild by comparison. How could the Duke of Harrington, who had rejected the most beautiful and accomplished ladies in England, choose to marry a woman who had been so thoroughly overlooked? Speculation ran rampant. Some claimed she must have trapped him somehow, perhaps through compromising circumstances. Others suggested she possessed some hidden fortune or connection that made the match advantageous. Still others simply declared the Duke had lost his senses entirely and would surely regret his decision. Lady Caroline Ashford, still bitter over her own failure to capture him, spread particularly vicious rumours about Arabella's supposedly manipulative nature. Miss Penelope Hartworth composed a scathing, satirical poem comparing the Duke's choice to a gardener, selecting weeds over roses. Countless others joined the chorus of criticism, each adding their own variation on the theme that Alexander had made a terrible mistake. But Alexander and Arabella remained serenely indifferent to it all. They had found in each other something more valuable than social approval, something that transcended arbitrary judgments about beauty and worth. Their love was real, tested not through easy circumstances, but through adversity that revealed its genuine depth. Lady Montgomery oscillated between pride at having a duke for a son-in-law and bewilderment that it was Arabella rather than Emily who had captured him. She attempted repeatedly to understand how this unexpected turn had occurred, interrogating Arabella about what strategies she had employed, what tricks she had used. The concept that her elder daughter had simply been herself, that authenticity rather than artifice had won the Duke's heart, seemed incomprehensible to her. Sir Harold, more practical and less concerned with social niceties, simply expressed gratitude for the advantageous match and relief that his elder daughter would be settled so well. His pride was evident when he walked through his club and received congratulations from other gentlemen, many of whom had previously pitied him for having an unmarriageable elder daughter. Emily, to her credit, eventually overcame her initial shock and jealousy to genuinely wish her sister happiness. The experience humbled her, forcing her to recognize that her beauty and accomplishments, while valuable, were not the only qualities worth possessing. She began treating Arabella with newfound respect, occasionally even seeking her advice, and their relationship improved considerably. The wedding was planned for June, allowing time for proper arrangements and giving society opportunity to adjust to this unprecedented union. Alexander involved himself in every detail, wanting Arabella to have precisely the wedding she desired, rather than the elaborate spectacle society might expect. They selected readings together, chose music that held meaning for both of them, designed a ceremony that reflected their values rather than merely their status. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and anticipation. Alexander found himself counting hours until he could see Arabella again, marking time by their meetings rather than by his usual schedule of obligations. His staff noticed the Duke smiling more, humming occasionally, displaying small signs of happiness they had never before witnessed. Arabella spent time learning about the extensive responsibilities that would come with being Duchess of Harrington. She met with Alexander's steward, his housekeeper, his estate managers, approaching each conversation with genuine interest and respect. She did not presume to immediately change established practices, but she asked thoughtful questions and offered observations that revealed her intelligence and good sense. The staff, initially skeptical of this unusual choice, gradually came to appreciate her kindness and capability. Alexander also took Arabella to meet his extended family, various cousins and distant relations who had specific expectations about whom he should marry. Most were initially skeptical, having heard society's criticisms, but Arabella won them over through her genuine warmth and evident love for Alexander. They saw how he looked at her, how he softened in her presence, how he laughed more freely and spoke more openly. They recognized that whatever society might think, their famously cold cousin had found genuine happiness. The wedding took place on a perfect June morning in the ancient chapel on the Harrington estate. The building dated back 300 years, its stone walls having witnessed countless family celebrations and sorrows. Morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across stone floors, and the scent of roses filled the air from elaborate arrangements that transformed the austere space into a garden. Arabella wore a gown of ivory silk that had been designed specifically for her, simple yet elegant, without the excessive embellishments that might have overwhelmed her natural grace. The dress suited her infinitely better than any elaborate creation could have, emphasizing her genuine beauty rather than attempting to create an artificial version. Her dark hair was dressed simply with fresh flowers, and she wore the emerald ring Alexander had given her, along with a pearl necklace that had belonged to his mother. As she walked down the aisle toward Alexander, accompanied by her father, she no longer felt invisible. Every person present watched her progress, but more importantly, Alexander's eyes held hers with such open love and devotion that everyone present could witness the transformation that had occurred in the once cold Duke. He looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in creation, as though her arrival was the fulfillment of every wish he had never dared to voice. For his part, Alexander felt his breath catch as he watched her approach. She was beautiful, genuinely beautiful, in ways that transcended conventional standards. She radiated quiet joy, serene confidence and pure love, and seeing her move toward him through the shafts of colored sunlight, he understood that he was receiving a gift beyond his deserving. When she reached him, Sir Harold placed her hand in Alexander's with visible emotion. "Take care of her, Your Grace," he said quietly. "She deserves every happiness." "I shall devote my life to ensuring she receives it," Alexander promised solemnly. The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, but the emotions involved were anything but conventional. When they exchanged vows, Alexander's voice held none of its customary authoritative distance. Instead, he spoke with tender sincerity, promising to cherish and honor the woman who had saved him from a life of emotional isolation. Each word carried the weight of absolute commitment, of promises he intended to keep, regardless of circumstances or challenges. "I, Alexander Charles Wrenwood, take thee, Arabella Catherine Montgomery, to be my wedded wife. I promise to see you always, to value you constantly, to love you endlessly, and to build with you a life of genuine partnership and shared purpose." This I vow before God and these witnesses, from this day forward for as long as we both shall live." Arabella responded with quiet conviction, her voice steady despite happy tears that threatened to overwhelm her. "I, Arabella Catherine Montgomery, take thee, Alexander Charles Wrenwood, to be my wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you faithfully, to challenge you when wisdom requires it, to support you in all worthy endeavors, and to love you not for your title or fortune, but for the man you truly are. This I vow before God and these witnesses, from this day forward, for as long as we both shall live." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to many eyes. It was not a perfunctory kiss of duty, but an expression of genuine love and commitment that made their feelings unmistakably clear to everyone present. The cold duke was gone, replaced by a man capable of profound emotion, transformed by the love of a woman society had deemed unworthy. The wedding breakfast that followed was elegant but warm, filled with genuine celebration rather than merely social obligation. Alexander and Arabella moved through their guests together, thanking everyone for their presence, but they remained always connected, hands touching frequently, sharing private smiles, existing in their own world, even while fulfilling public duties. During the toasts, Lord Blackwood rose and spoke with unusual emotion. "I have known Alexander for 15 years, and I had concluded that the warmth and joy I witnessed in my own marriage would forever be denied to my friend. I believed he was too guarded, too wounded by his upbringing, too committed to emotional isolation to ever permit love into his life. I am delighted to have been proven wrong. Miss Montgomery, that is, the Duchess of Harrington, has accomplished what I thought impossible. She has revealed the good man hidden beneath the cold exterior, and in doing so, she has given my friend the greatest gift possible, the ability to feel deeply and love completely. To the Duke and Duchess, may your happiness increase with each passing year." The sentiment was genuine, and Alexander found himself genuinely moved by his friend's words. He squeezed Arabella's hand beneath the table, and she returned the pressure, their private communication requiring no words. Their life together proved the truth and depth of their love. Alexander, once considered the coldest man in England, became known for his surprising warmth and humanity. He smiled more readily, laughed more freely, and treated those around him with a kindness that astonished his former acquaintances. The servants at Harrington Manor, who had served him dutifully but without affection, gradually came to genuinely care for their employer as they witnessed his transformation. Arabella, once invisible, became beloved throughout their estates for her gentle compassion and genuine interest in the welfare of all who depended upon them. She learned the names of every servant, inquired after their families, ensured that their working conditions were fair and their wages adequate. She established schools on each of the Harrington properties, providing education for children who would otherwise have none. She created lending libraries, organized charitable activities, and generally deployed the considerable resources now at her disposal toward meaningful purposes. Together, they formed a true partnership. Alexander consulted Arabella on matters of estate management and even parliamentary business, valuing her perspective and insights. She brought to his attention issues he might otherwise have overlooked, particularly regarding how policies affected those without power or voice. He introduced her to influential figures who could help advance their shared philanthropic goals, using his position to amplify her voice and vision. They worked together on the expanded charity school, which grew from a single modest building to a network of institutions across their properties. They established scholarship programs allowing talented children of limited means to pursue advanced education. They funded research into improved agricultural techniques that could help tenant farmers become more prosperous. They supported artists and writers whose work might otherwise have gone unrecognized. Their efforts were not universally applauded. Some members of society criticized them for overstepping their appropriate role, for concerning themselves with matters that should be left to each individual's proper station. Lady Caroline, still bitter, declared that the Duke had become weak and sentimental, allowing his unfortunate wife to lead him into foolish philanthropy. But Alexander and Arabella remained undeterred, understanding that meaningful change often faced resistance from those invested in maintaining existing structures. They had 4 children over the years, 2 sons and 2 daughters, each one raised to value character over appearance, substance over status. Alexander proved a surprisingly devoted father, involved in his children's lives in ways his own father never had been. He read to them, played with them, answered their endless questions with patience and care. He wanted them to know they were loved unconditionally, that their value lay in who they were rather than what they achieved. Arabella mothered with the same gentle wisdom she brought to everything else. She was patient but firm, affectionate but not indulgent, ensuring their children understood both privilege and responsibility. She taught them to read early, to think critically, to question assumptions, to treat everyone with respect regardless of station. Together they created a family culture dramatically different from the cold formality that had characterized Alexander's upbringing. Harrington Manor, once austere and intimidating, became warm and welcoming. Laughter echoed through halls that had previously known only stern silence. Children's artwork hung in formal spaces, and family dinners featured lively conversation rather than rigid protocol. In the evenings, long after their children had been tucked into bed, the Duke and Duchess of Harrington could often be found in their library, reading together in comfortable silence or engaged in spirited discussions about literature, philosophy, and life. Sometimes Alexander would look up from his book to find Arabella watching him with that same serene expression he had first noticed at Lady Pemberton's ball so many years ago, and his heart would perform those same peculiar acrobatics even after years of marriage. "What are you thinking?" he would ask, though he had asked the question countless times, and she had answered it nearly as often. "That I am the most fortunate woman alive," she would reply, the answer consistent, though the depth of feeling behind it only increased with time. "No," he would correct gently, as he always did, "I am the fortunate one. You saved me, Arabella. You thawed a heart I believed frozen beyond redemption. You showed me what love means, what genuine partnership looks like, what happiness feels like." "We saved each other," she would respond with wisdom, born of their shared journey. "I was invisible until you chose to see me, and you were imprisoned in ice until I chose to believe in your capacity for warmth. We each gave the other what they most needed, recognition and trust. And in those moments, they would reach for each other's hands, these two people who had found in one another everything they had needed but never known to seek. Their fingers would intertwine with the easy familiarity of long practice, and they would sit thus for long moments, content in silence, secure in love, grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought them together. Years passed, and their love only deepened, acquiring layers and textures that only time can provide. They weathered challenges together, the death of Sir Harold, difficult parliamentary battles, the inevitable worries that come with raising children, financial pressures during poor harvest years. But each challenge only strengthened their bond, proving that their love was built on foundations solid enough to withstand storms. When Alexander was elderly, his hair silver and his face lined with time, he still looked at Arabella with the same wonder he had felt that first morning in Hyde Park. The passage of years had only made her more beautiful to him, her face more dear because it reflected their shared history, every line earned through laughter or tears they had experienced together. And she, her own beauty, matured into something even more radiant than youth, still saw in him the man behind the title, the tender heart beneath the aristocratic bearing. She knew his weaknesses and loved him despite them, knew his strengths and celebrated them, knew the full complexity of who he was, and cherished every aspect. On their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and those whose lives they had touched, Alexander raised a glass in toast to his wife. His hand trembled slightly with age, but his voice remained strong, carrying the same authority that had once intimidated so many. "To the woman who taught me that being truly seen is worth more than any title, any fortune, any protection that isolation provides. To Arabella, who showed this frozen duke that even the coldest heart can learn to love. To my wife, my partner, my dearest friend, the woman who gave meaning to my existence and joy to my days. May I prove worthy of her for whatever time remains to us." She smiled at him through happy tears, that same genuine smile that had captured his heart so many decades ago, unchanged by time in its essential warmth and authenticity. And to the man who proved that visibility is not about being noticed by everyone, but about being truly known by the right person. To Alexander, who saw past society's judgments to recognize my value when no one else bothered to look. To my husband, who has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams and love beyond my deserving. I am grateful for every moment we have shared. Their guests applauded, many wiping away tears of their own. The love between the Duke and Duchess of Harrington had become legendary, a story told and retold throughout England as proof that true love exists and can triumph over circumstances. Their grandchildren gathered around them, listened with rapt attention as they were encouraged to share the story of how they met. Alexander and Arabella exchanged glances, communicating without words, and began the tale they had told many times but never tired of recounting. I was invisible, Arabella began softly, defined by what I lacked rather than what I possessed. I had given up hope of ever being truly seen, of ever mattering to anyone beyond my immediate family, and even to them I was more obligation than joy. And I was frozen, Alexander continued, taking her hand, imprisoned by fear and pride, convinced that isolation was strength and that love was weakness. I had built walls so high and thick that I believed nothing could breach them. But then, they said together, smiling at each other with the ease of long practice, we found each other. Your grandmother, Alexander continued, his eyes never leaving Arabella's face, taught me that the greatest courage lies not in maintaining emotional distance, but in allowing oneself to be vulnerable. She showed me that true strength means opening one's heart despite the risk of pain. And your grandfather, Arabella added, her voice warm with affection even after 5 decades, taught me that my worth was never defined by others' failure to recognize it. He helped me understand that I was always valuable, always worthy of love, simply waiting to be seen by someone capable of truly looking. Their eldest grandson, a thoughtful young man preparing to enter Parliament himself, asked the question that many had wondered over the years. But grandfather, everyone says you could have married anyone, princesses, great beauties, women of enormous fortune and influence. What made grandmother different? What made you choose her when society expected something else entirely? Alexander was quiet for a moment, gathering thoughts shaped by decades of reflection. Society expected me to choose based on calculations of advantage, beauty that would produce attractive heirs, connections that would expand my influence, fortune that would increase my wealth. But none of those considerations addressed the fundamental emptiness of my existence. I had everything except the one thing that truly matters, someone with whom to share life authentically. He squeezed Arabella's hand, feeling the familiar comfort of her presence. Your grandmother was different because she was genuine in a world of pretense. She spoke truth when others offered flattery. She challenged me intellectually when others merely agreed with everything I said. She saw me as a man rather than merely a duke, a person with feelings and flaws rather than simply a title and fortune. In her presence, I could be myself rather than the role I had been trained to perform. But more than that, he continued, his voice growing softer with emotion, she needed me to see her as much as I needed her to see me. We completed each other not because we were perfect, but because our imperfections fit together. She gave me warmth, and I gave her visibility. She taught me to feel, and I helped her recognize her own worth. Our love was not about what we could gain from each other, but about what we could become together. Arabella added her own perspective, wanting their grandchildren to understand both sides of the story. I think many people misunderstood what attracted your grandfather to me. They assumed there must be some hidden calculation, some secret advantage I offered. But the truth was simpler and more profound. We understood each other. We had both experienced isolation, though in different forms. He had isolated himself behind walls of ice, and I had been isolated by society's indifference. We recognized in each other the loneliness we had each endured, and we offered each other the antidote, genuine connection. Their youngest granddaughter, a romantic girl of 16, sighed wistfully. It sounds like a fairy tale. The cold duke and the invisible lady finding true love. It was better than a fairy tale, Arabella replied with gentle wisdom, because it was real. Fairy tales end at the wedding, suggesting that love conquers all and nothing difficult follows. But real love is tested by time and circumstance. Your grandfather and I have weathered 50 years together, years that included joy and sorrow, triumph and disappointment, ease and struggle. Our love endured not because it was perfect, but because we chose each other anew each day, even when choosing each other was difficult. Alexander nodded in agreement. Love is not a single moment of recognition or a grand romantic gesture, though those have their place. Love is the daily choice to see your partner truly, to honor them, to work through disagreements respectfully, to support their dreams, to forgive their failures, to celebrate their successes. It is built through countless small moments of kindness and consideration, through years of showing up for each other regardless of convenience. He looked around at their assembled family, children who had grown into admirable adults, grandchildren who represented the future, friends whose lives had been enriched by their love. Your grandmother and I have been blessed beyond measure, not merely in our love for each other, but in what that love has allowed us to create. These schools and charities, these opportunities we have provided, this family we have nurtured, none of it would exist if we had married according to society's expectations rather than our heart's wisdom. One of their sons, the younger one who had inherited his father's serious demeanor, but his mother's compassionate heart, raised his own glass. To parents who taught us by example what love truly means, you showed us that titles and wealth mean nothing if the heart remains empty, that true nobility lies in character rather than birth, and that the best legacy we can leave is not material fortune, but the example of lives well lived and love well shared. The celebration continued late into the evening, filled with music and laughter, stories and reminiscences. But eventually the guests departed. The candles burned low, and Alexander and Arabella found themselves alone in their private sitting room, as they had been countless evenings before. Alexander helped Arabella into her favorite chair near the fire, noting with tender concern how she moved more slowly now, how arthritis had stiffened her joints despite the best medical care available. He settled into his own chair beside hers, and they sat in comfortable silence watching flames dance across logs. 50 years, Arabella said softly, breaking the peaceful quiet. Sometimes it feels as though it has been forever, and sometimes it seems like yesterday that we met in Lady Pemberton's ballroom. Do you remember how frightened I was that first time you called upon me? I was certain you had made a mistake, that you would realize your error and withdraw your attentions. I remember, Alexander replied, his voice rough with emotion. I also remember my own fear, terror that you would reject me, that this unprecedented feeling I had discovered would be dismissed, that I would return to that cold, empty existence I had endured before knowing you. I had never needed anything before meeting you, had never felt vulnerable or exposed. You taught me that needing someone is not weakness, but the greatest strength. We were both so broken, Arabella reflected. You by your upbringing and your determination never to be hurt, and I by society's relentless message that I had no value. Separately, we would have remained trapped in our respective prisons. Together, we found freedom. Do you have any regrets? Alexander asked, a question he had never posed before, though he had sometimes wondered. Your life could have been quieter, simpler, without the burdens that came with being Duchess of Harrington. You could have found contentment in a smaller sphere, without the public scrutiny and criticism you endured. Arabella turned to look at him directly, her hazel eyes, still beautiful despite the years, still containing those flecks of gold that had first captivated him, filled with absolute certainty. Not a single regret. Yes, there were challenges. Yes, there were times when society's cruelty wounded me. Yes, the responsibilities were sometimes overwhelming. But I would endure it all again, every difficult moment, every criticism, every challenge, for the privilege of loving you and being loved by you. You gave me a life of meaning and purpose. You gave me family and home. Most importantly, you gave me yourself. The real you, not the cold facade you showed the world. How could I regret the greatest gift I have ever received? Alexander felt tears prick his eyes, something that still occasionally surprised him, even after decades of emotional thawing. I love you, Arabella. I have loved you since that morning in Hyde Park when I first truly spoke with you, Though I lacked the wisdom to name it then, I will love you until my last breath, and if there is anything beyond this life, I shall love you there as well." "And I love you, Alexander," she replied, reaching across the space between their chairs to take his hand. "You are the answer to prayers I never dared to speak, the fulfillment of dreams I told myself were foolish. You made me believe in my own worth, and in doing so you gave me the foundation for everything good in my life." They sat thus until the fire burned to embers, hands clasped, hearts united, two souls who had found in each other the completion that had eluded them separately. Eventually, Alexander helped Arabella to bed, a nightly ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, these small acts of care and tenderness that expressed love more eloquently than grand gestures ever could. As they lay together in the darkness, Arabella's head resting on Alexander's shoulder as it had for 50 years, she whispered, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching me to feel," he whispered back. And in the morning, when sunlight streamed through their windows and their long-serving maid brought morning tea, she found them still entwined, having passed peacefully in the night, together even in death as they had been in life. The news of their simultaneous passing spread throughout England, carried by those who had known them and those who had only heard their story. It was unprecedented, remarkable, the kind of ending that poets would celebrate and romantics would sigh over. The cold Duke and the invisible lady, united in love for 50 years, had departed this world together, neither willing to exist without the other. Their funeral was attended by hundreds, family, friends, servants, and countless others whose lives they had touched through their philanthropic work. The charity schools they had founded closed for a day of mourning. The children they had taught and supported came to pay respects to the lady who had believed in them when no one else did. The tenants from their estates travelled long distances to honour the Duke and Duchess who had treated them with fairness and compassion. During the service, their eldest son spoke eloquently of parents who had exemplified love in its truest form. "They taught us that love is not about possession or control, but about mutual respect and shared growth. They showed us that true partnership means celebrating each other's strengths while supporting each other through weaknesses. They demonstrated that the highest form of love is seeing another person completely, flaws and all, and choosing them anyway every day regardless of circumstance." Their daughter added her own tribute, her voice thick with emotion. "Mother and father showed us that it is never too late to change, never too late to open one's heart, never too late to become who you were meant to be. Father transformed from the coldest man in England into the warmest, most loving presence in our lives. Mother blossomed from invisibility into radiant confidence. They proved that love has the power to heal old wounds and create new possibilities." Lord Blackwood, now quite elderly himself, offered final words for his lifelong friend. "Alexander Wrenwood was the most remarkable man I have ever known, not because of his title or wealth or accomplishments, but because of his capacity for change. He had every reason to remain frozen in his emotional isolation. His upbringing had taught him that safety lay in distance, that vulnerability invited pain. Yet he chose love anyway. He chose to risk everything for the possibility of genuine connection. In doing so, he taught all of us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face fear for something more valuable. His love for Arabella, and hers for him, stands as testament to the transformative power of genuine human connection. The story of Alexander and Arabella passed into legend, told and retold through generations. It became the standard against which other love stories were measured, the example cited when people spoke of true partnership. Their charitable institutions continued to operate long after their deaths, supported by the fortune they had dedicated to ensuring that future generations would benefit from their love. The emerald ring that Alexander had given Arabella, the one he had selected because it reminded him of her eyes, became a family heirloom passed down through their daughter's line. Each woman who wore it learned the story of how the coldest duke in England had loved the invisible lady, how their unlikely union had transformed both their lives and countless others. Their grandchildren carried forward the lessons they had learned, treating all people with respect regardless of station, using whatever resources and influence they possessed toward meaningful purposes, choosing partners based on genuine connection rather than social advantage. The values Alexander and Arabella had modeled rippled outward through time, affecting people who never knew them personally, but benefited from the culture they had helped create. In the library at Harrington Manor, visitors could still see the two chairs where the Duke and Duchess had spent countless evenings reading and conversing. The chairs remained positioned side by side, a permanent memorial to their partnership. On a small table between them rested two well-worn books, Arabella's copy of Paradise Regained and Alexander's volume of parliamentary history, their pages marked with notes in the margins, evidence of minds engaged and hearts connected. Above the fireplace hung a portrait commissioned for their 25th anniversary. The artist had captured them as they truly were, Alexander gazing at Arabella with undisguised love and admiration, and Arabella looking directly at the viewer with quiet confidence, her hand resting in her husband's. It was not a formal portrait emphasizing status and wealth, but an intimate representation of genuine partnership and affection. Those who studied it carefully could see in their eyes the depth of feeling that had sustained them through decades together. The portrait bore a simple inscription on its frame, words that Alexander had chosen and Arabella had approved. True love sees what others overlook. A message for every woman who has ever felt invisible. Dear reader, if you have journeyed with us through this tale of unexpected love and profound transformation, perhaps you recognize something of yourself in Arabella's story. Perhaps you too have felt overlooked, undervalued or invisible in a world that celebrates only certain kinds of beauty and worth. Perhaps you have wondered if anyone would ever truly see you, truly value you, truly choose you for yourself alone. Know this with absolute certainty. Your value is not determined by others' failure to recognize it. Like Arabella, you possess depths and strengths and beauty that transcend surface appearances and superficial judgments. The right person will see you, truly see you, and in that recognition, you will discover that you were never invisible at all. You were simply waiting to be seen by someone worthy of the privilege. Your worth is inherent, not assigned. It does not depend on meeting arbitrary standards of age or appearance or accomplishment. It does not require validation from those who are too shallow to perceive genuine value. You are enough, exactly as you are in this present moment. The love you deserve is not about being chosen from among many competitors, not about winning some contest or performing some role. It is about being recognized as unique and irreplaceable by someone who values authenticity over artifice, depth over display, and substance over superficiality. Do not dim your light trying to fit into others' narrow definitions of value. Do not exhaust yourself performing for approval that will never satisfy because it is rooted in seeing you as interchangeable rather than extraordinary. Instead, shine with your own authentic brilliance. Cultivate your own genuine interests and passions. Become the fullest version of yourself possible. Trust that the right person will be drawn to that light like a traveler finding home after a long journey through darkness. And remember this, the story Arabella and Alexander created together did not begin when he first saw her. It began years earlier, in all the moments when she chose to maintain her integrity despite being overlooked, when she developed her mind through reading, when she served others through teaching, when she remained kind despite having ample reason for bitterness. She was always valuable, always worthy. She simply had not yet met someone capable of recognizing what she offered. The same is true for you. Your story is still being written. The best chapters may yet lie ahead. The person who will see you truly, who will value you properly, who will love you completely, that person may be just beyond the next turning, waiting to discover what everyone else has been too blind to perceive. Until that moment arrives, love yourself. See your own worth with the clarity you wish others would demonstrate. Treat yourself with the kindness and respect you deserve. Build a life of meaning and purpose that would be fulfilling even if no romantic partner ever appeared. Become so genuinely yourself that when the right person arrives, they will recognize immediately that they have found something rare and precious. You are not invisible. You are not inadequate. You are not too old or too ordinary or too anything that makes you unworthy of love. You are exactly who you need to be, possessing exactly what someone somewhere has been searching for, without knowing what they sought. Be patient, be hopeful, be yourself. Your Alexander may be searching for you even now, not knowing your name or face, but recognizing somehow that something essential is missing from his life. When you meet, you will both understand that all the waiting, all the loneliness, all the moments of doubt were preparing you for something extraordinary, a love built on genuine recognition, mutual respect, and shared values. That is the love worth waiting for. That is the love worth believing in. And that love is absolutely possible for you. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share our channel. Your support inspires us to keep creating more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and together we'll continue sharing tales that warm the heart. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another of our historical stories. Click and let yourself be enchanted by another unforgettable tale. With all our gratitude, echoes of romance.